The Sonata Opus 79 in G major, or Sonata number 25 in the cycle, was composed together with Sonata 24 as a commission by the Italian pianist and publisher Muzio Clementi, who owned a publishing house in London. Muzio came to visit Beethoven in 1807 and agreed with Beethoven to take a large pile of his manuscripts for publication in London, among them the concerto for violin, which he then commissioned Beethoven to arrange for piano and orchestra as well, which is why we have the version for piano and orchestra. In addition to these various manuscripts which he agreed to publish, he also commissioned 3 new works from Beethoven, 2 sonatas and a fantasy, to be written without any time constraints and at Beethoven's leisure. Beethoven's leisure happened to take place in 1809, 2 years later, and he delivered to Muzio Clementi the Fantasy, Opus 77, and the 2 sonatas, number 24, Opus 78, and number 25, 79. When he then decided to publish them also in German-speaking lands, he decided to separate the 2 sonatas, which were published as one opus by Clementi, into 2 opus numbers, the way we have them today, and this was based on the very different difficulty between the 2 sonatas as Beethoven perceived it. He saw that the sonata number 25 was quite a bit easier and decided to designate it sonata facile, an easy sonata or a sonatina, and this is how it appears today. Perhaps the idea of a sonata facile name was inspired by Mozart's very famous and popular which is also titled Sonata Facile. And interestingly, we see that the first sketches of this sonata were also in C major, like Mozart's work, but then he moved it to G major, which was the final key of the piece. It is in 3 movements, the first of which is titled Presto alla tedesca. Alla tedesca means in the spirit or in the style of a German dance. Trying to find out exactly what tedesca as a dance meant is not easy, because it seems to apply to various kinds of dances in triple time which were popular around that time. One of them was the Ländler, one of them was the Walzer, which was the precursor of the waltz, and one of them is perhaps unhelpfully called just Deutscher Tanz, which just means German dance. But in any case, the unifying feature of all of these is the triple time meter. Beethoven wrote only one more tedesca in his life, much later. In the string quartet Opus 130, we find a movement which is also titled Alla danza tedesca, in the style of a German dance. And very interestingly, it is also in G major. And not only that, but they have the same opening motive, just as a mirror image. Our sonata starts, and the quartet movement is I think it is not by chance that these little and subtle connections exist between the 2 only tedescas which Beethoven has written, but of course it doesn't affect our playing here. The style is different, the instrumentation is different, and the time and period of Beethoven's life is different as well. The question of how fast this Presto should be is interesting. We could take it really fast in 1, and it is very tempting to do so. It feels very satisfying, almost virtuosic. But I think there is an argument to be made in favor of a slightly more settled tempo, because then it becomes perhaps, yes, less virtuosic and less pianistic, but also more dance-like. I think it is easier to imagine a dance when we could imagine it being actually danced to. But later, in the middle section, when we have these repeating figures, I think in this tempo, when you have the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, the feeling of couples dancing and swirling is much more tangible than if it's really fast, 1, 1, 1, 1. Speaking of this section, despite this being designated a sonata facile, this section is very uncomfortable and probably not meant for beginners really. The left hand has to jump over the right. With speed, with precision, and yet light and dance-like, and the danger of missing the jump is actually quite great. So this requires quite a bit of coordination and work, and I would not say that this is any more easy than any passage in one of Beethoven's other sonatas that are not designated sonata facile. But of course that was up to Beethoven to decide. Or for example, this little corner here. The hands are so much in each other's way that you really need to choreograph the hand movements so that the right hand moves out of the way quickly enough for the left hand to land. So that is perhaps not as easy as Beethoven has meant, and definitely not as easy as the second and third movements, which are indeed a little bit on the easier side. I'd like to show one corner from the coda because it shows what the theme was meant to be in the beginning. This idea of a symmetrical theme, so something which is then repeated twice and much more close to the spirit and the idea of a contradance than the more sophisticated theme, which is not repeated exactly, but then is reversed. That is, the last bar has the same structure as the first, and then the middle section is repeated right after. But then in the coda, he comes back to, again, what we saw in the sketches, this idea of complete symmetry. And after this, the movement just dances itself out. And this lovely arpeggio just evaporating and covering 5 octaves at the same time. It's lovely. The second movement is, in my opinion, the least Beethovenian movement of the entire cycle. I think if this was authored by Mendelssohn, this music, we wouldn't have thought it strange. A kind of barcarola, the song of the gondoliers, like Mendelssohn indeed wrote among his songs without words. Very simple, heartfelt, and almost popular in its musical language, something which Beethoven somewhat rarely does. In the middle, there's a big operatic line. Really singing, the left hand being completely accompanying, also something which Beethoven doesn't often do. His left hands are often imbued with their own melodic character, but this, it is truly an opera singer soaring high above a relatively simple accompaniment. And in the end, after the reprise, the same accompaniment comes back, but this time with the opening melody. simple melody, but one which goes directly into our hearts and stays there. The finale is much lighter, much closer in spirit to the first movement. Interestingly, this harmonic progression is exactly one which Beethoven used in the opening of his Sonata number 30. So the opening is like Pachelbel's canon, but then it changes, especially here, going upwards rather than down. The change between the two movements, going from a simpler G major to a more refined E major. The way it's written, how here there is a flow and the left hand is participating. Versus a much simpler left hand. And perhaps most importantly, where the downbeats are. This one is relatively four square. It's 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So very, very stable. In the later sonata, this is the upbeat. It's 2, 1, 2, 1. So all these small things together combine and give us the effect that the later sonata is suffused with poetry and some kind of transcendent beauty, whereas this is just lovely and nice. And there's nothing to be said against lovely and nice. We enjoy lovely and nice, but there's a lot to be said for poetry and transcendent beauty, which Beethoven then achieves with the same harmonic progression, but presented differently in the later sonata. This is in our sonata here, this is a short rondo. So this idea, then repeated several times later with triplets, and last time with semiquavers. And in between there are a few short episodes, mostly boisterous and full of character. Or a little bit like the Rondo, which is subtitled Rage Over a Lost Penny. So perhaps pseudo-anger and not real anger. Anger which is a little bit comical. And then at the very end he makes us think that there would be a big ending. Just to end it lightly. Perhaps more fitting for this more gentle sonata and this more gentle last movement.